Hello, this is Nathan P. Butler, and this is kind of my vlog, the voice of reason or lack thereof. If you're curious about what you're seeing behind me here in the setup, this is my usual setup for doing the Patreon exclusive Q&A videos that I do for the Nobility of the Butlerniverse, the highest tier over on Patreon. More about that in a minute. And this setup here with the boards is actually how my office looks during the day. I cover up the lower shelves with 3 project boards sitting vertically to keep my son, who's a toddler now, from getting into parts of the collection back there. I left those in place because I just finished recording the Q&A episode for the month of May 2020 for the Nobility of the Butlerniverse, that exclusive video that they get each month. And I wanted to show them how the background changed and went into some detail about it there at the beginning of that Q&A episode. But one thing I try not to do is be overly redundant, because sometimes I get asked the same questions over and over and over again by people in different venues and whatnot. For instance, I've had people ask me, why didn't you do a special vlog episode specifically about your thoughts on Rise of Skywalker? The answer is because I'd already talked about it to death. Not only on some Q&A episodes like this one, but on Star Wars Beyond the Films, and on Star Wars Action News, and so on and so on. So I'd had opportunities to already talk about it quite a bit. I would just be saying the same things I'd said over again if I did a special vlog just for that. So I didn't do one. My recording time these days is very precious. I don't get a lot of it, so doing redundant stuff really is not the most efficient way to use my time. So like I said, I just finished that Q&A episode. Who are the Nobility of the Butlerniverse? What is it? The Nobility of the Butlerniverse is the highest tier of support over on my Patreon. Basically, my Patreon has 3 different tiers. The Travelers to the Butlerniverse is the $1 tier. They get themselves thanks in those project update episodes each month, in the credits and whatnot. They get into the credits page on the Patreon credits for a Saga on Home Video 2nd Edition when that gets eventually published. But that's essentially what that level gets, sort of an acknowledgement and a small amount of support. Then you've got your $5 tier, the Denizens of the Butlerniverse. They get access to what the first tier got, but also at least 2 exclusive audio commentaries each month, which I put together primarily right now for the Clone Wars cartoon series, working our way through the series. Then there's a higher tier, the top tier. That's a $10 tier, and that's the Nobility of the Butlerniverse. On top of everything everybody else gets, they also get an exclusive monthly Q&A episode where I gather up questions for an entire month, and then that next month, answer those all in a video Q&A with this type of setup, sort of a more informal conversation with them, where there's some back and forth through the comments from month to month. Usually the boards aren't there, but you got a different backdrop, so it looks a little bit different than what you would normally see on one of my videos. It's faster to set up, and it's just a more informal way to go about talking about the subjects that they ask about. So, in the questions from April that were addressed in the episode I just recorded here in early May, the question came up about my thoughts retrospectively specific to the Clone Wars. And that's something I've been asked about over and over and over again. Will there be a special podcast about it? Will you do a special video about it? Etc., etc. But that was a very detailed question where I had a chance to get a lot off my chest and a lot of thoughts out. And I didn't want to just redundantly kind of force my way through trying to do something else. Again, I don't want to be redundant. I need to be more efficient with my time. So, what I decided to do was to ask the person who asked that question, Jonathan Confer, one of the members of the Nobility of the Butlerniverse, if it was cool with him if I took that question and its answer, and essentially took that section of the exclusive Q&A video and also included it here as a video on the regular YouTube channel so I can get those thoughts out, and maybe those, who have continuously asked me for my thoughts on it, even before May 4th when the season finale ended for Season 7, maybe this is a chance for them to get that information, get my thoughts on it, but without me having to record a second time. So what you are about to see here with this sort of different looking format is a snippet from the May 2020 Nobility of the Butlerniverse exclusive Q&A with a question asked first by Jonathan Conver, then my thoughts on the Clone Wars in retrospect based specifically on his question. The Nobility of the Butlerniverse have quite a few other questions this month that are in their episode that's quite a bit longer, but this gives you a chance to get that here, and I just sort of dropped it into the vlog format so that folks kind of know what to look for, where they're usually looking for my thoughts on something specific Star Wars related. So, without further ado, this is the question and then the answer provided by Jonathan Confer and then myself. All right, our next question is one related to the Clone Wars. It comes from Jonathan Confer, but then Ennis replied to it, and then Jonathan replied to that, so I'll read all three of those before diving into the response. And this is actually why this is a later video this month than it usually would be, because we wanted to make sure that I had a chance to see the actual finale, Victory and Death. Sounds vaguely less Starfighter-ish, where it's Victory or Death, on May 4th before being able to record. So, Jonathan says, "Hey Nathan, I know it's odd to ask this, but if you could hold off until May 4th to answer this, I'd appreciate it, since I wouldn't want to wait another month." Done. The Clone Wars is finally over, with the Siege of Mandalore concluding its film, as Whitwer referred to it on Twitter. The series that started in August 2008 is done. Have you been through it all from the beginning? From Sky Guy to Artui, Cad Bane to Clovis, Satine to Lux, Ventress to Talzin, Mortis to Captain Tarkin, Umbara to Kadavo, Savage to Maul, Saw Gerrera to Gascon, Barriss to Ahsoka. We've been through a lot this past decade. There were some good, some bad, and some Gascon. I guess my biggest question is, how has your opinion of the series changed since 2008? As the show evolved and began to increase in quality, did your opinion reflect that? During the Legends continuity, I assume it was more difficult for you to view it positively, given your timeline gold. I guess I'm just asking for your retrospective on the series as a whole, and how certain opinions have changed in the years since. Thoughts on Maul's return, the Night Sisters and Ventress, B.J. Hughes' Jar Jar, who I think Ahmed confirmed was actually Phil Lamar in a tweet, and most importantly, the character that is Ahsoka Tano. I know this is a massive one that will take you the longest to answer, and I apologize for that, as I know teaching has taken up more of your time now that everything is online instead of just the normal bit you're used to. However, I can't wait to hear your thoughts from someone who was in the community during the 2D Clone Wars multimedia series to give his perspective on the Filoni/Lucas 3D TCW series. Thank you for responding to this monster of a question, and may the Force be with you." That's then followed up by a question from Ennis, or a comment from Ennis, saying, "I was just about to ask a similar question, Jonathan. Nathan, I'd love to hear your thoughts about the Clone Wars in retrospect as well, especially your thoughts on the Siege of Mandalore and how it ties into Revenge of the Sith a la Rogue One. Jonathan, sorry for jumping into your question, but I just wanted to show that I was interested as well." To which Jonathan replied, "Hey, no worries. Nathan has had experience in StarWars.com forums, doing the Timeline Gold, Republic Forces Radio Network, and Chrono Radio. He's been around the scene for a while, so wondered that I just happened to ask first." Okay, that's a lot. So, in general, I will say that even with Siege of Mandalore, the Clone Wars is not my favorite of the animated Star Wars series. I would say it's my second favorite, because my favorite is Rebels. In the early days, Clone Wars animation wasn't nearly as high quality as it eventually became, especially with Siege of Mandalore, but I'm thinking even once you get to about the time jump in the middle of Season 3, where they changed the character models and such. And it really kind of took them a while to figure out a direction for the series. Like, they kind of knew what they were doing in the sense of, well, it's the Clone Wars. Anakin's got a Padawan. Here's Rex. It's the Clone Wars. We're just going to tell Clone Wars stories. And it really didn't feel like the series as a whole had much of a direction for quite a while. When you finally get to the point where we're talking like late Season 3, heading into 4, heading into 5, Lost Missions, and so on, the show really kind of started to get a grip on this idea that it could tell these big arc-based stories that could actually build on each other over time with references to each other. It also didn't help that the first, 2.5 seasons, plus, kind of one episode later with Maul in it, Revival, weren't told in chronological order. Oddly enough, they returned to that for the final season because there's 3 arcs in the final season and the actual order of them chronologically is 2, 1, 3. But all of it just kind of made for a really bizarrely designed series that didn't feel like it knew what it wanted to do, and in the process of it was giving us, young, bratty Ahsoka, right? And Sky Guy and Snips and all this cutesy crap. Where again, they didn't seem to understand or really have a good grip on who their audience was going to be. Was this a show made for kids or was this a show made for adults? Or was it both? Because you look at something like Siege of Mandalore, that is not for kids. You look at something like the Maul arcs later, not really all that much for kids. And yet you look at those early ones, Artui and all that kind of stuff. Goldie for Gold Squadron and Gold Leader, and I love gold. And all that kind of stuff early on with Ahsoka. And the fact that you had the audacity on their part to say, you know what? We think this is going to be such an awesome series. We really want to kick it off in grand style. We're going to take 4 of the episodes, edit them together into a film, and release that in theaters as the worst received up to that point at least, Star Wars film ever. Our one attempt at doing an animated Star Wars film in theaters, and for the most part, most people thought it kind of sucked. But watch our show! Glorified TV movie becomes theatrical film. Just a lot of stuff in those early days where it sort of felt like they didn't quite know what they wanted to do. Along the way, Jonathan's right. Basically, when it came to the Legends era, right, the era prior to the reboot, where story groups' new canon took the stage, back when we were still being told everything is meant to fit together into the Legends continuity, but it's okay when there are contradictions because we got this tiered system, right? G, T, C, S in canons. Don't worry, it's all going to work, it's all going to fit. It was constantly frustrating watching the Clone Wars to see instances where something was just casually thrown out of continuity because Lucas had a whim. Like, Greedo, yes, we said Greedo. I'm sorry, wait, we've got a bunch of Greedo origin stuff already. Are you telling us that Greedo the Elder in the cutscene for Phantom Menace was really Greedo and... oh, shit. Right? And, hey, here's Quinlan Voss. Don't you guys want to see Quinlan Voss? He's a badass from the comics. You love him. Ta-da! Quinlan Voss, we love him too. Except we're going to completely destroy his characterization and make him garbage. We're going to make him basically a surfer bum type goofball as opposed to the dark character we know, at least until Dark Disciple. Pardon the beep there. I was on a roll. So yeah, it just... there were so many instances early on where it just was like, what are you doing? You know, Lucas had stepped back from Star Wars after the prequels with the assumption that that was it for him. And going into Attack of the Clones, he allowed the publishing arm to do all these Clone Wars stories that were very intricately put together, intricately planned to fill that 3-year gap. And that was a gap they were not allowed to touch before. So this wasn't just they're happening to move into that era because now is when they're making films on it. It was that era was off limits. Now you're allowed to play, go have fun. And then 3 years after Revenge of the Sith, here comes Revenge of the George and bashes the crap out of it. With the promise from Leland Shee, of course, that don't worry, when it's all done, we'll figure out a way to make it all fit together and let you all know as we retcon stuff. Of course, that never happens, because by the time the series reaches its end, or at least its end on Cartoon Network at the end of Season 5, we already know the series is being canceled, the buyout is happening, the reboot is happening, so screw it. We're never going to get an answer on that. We've gotten some stuff since then that has been terrific on top of that series. We've had Dark Disciple, we've now had Season 6 and Season 7. Season 6, of course, being from Netflix in the US at least, and then Season 7 coming here. It's just one of those things where back then it was hard to watch without being frustrated because every week it was like, okay, what is George going to change this week? What is the series going to kick out of continuity this week? For God's sake, could they not have just made this background character a different character so it didn't screw up these appearances here? Who's running the ship here when they claim it's all meant to fit? And now it's kind of a worse but better situation, right? Because now, here we are with the new story group canon, and Clone Wars was at the ground floor. It's like they took the G-canon, T-canon stuff out of Legends and copied it into a new document and then added stuff to it like new books, new video games, new comics, new series like Rebels, new films. But that core of G and T carries over as the heart of this new canon, so it already exists. There's not an expectation we're going to see a bunch of stories that are going to clash with it, then have to fix it later because it's already there as part of the foundation. And in that sense, it makes it a lot easier now when I go back and rewatch the Clone Wars to record the commentaries for Patreon to actually just enjoy the episodes for what they are. Because there's not a lot of contradictions with new stuff. Granted, not a lot of new stuff has been put in that particular era rather than the Clone Wars film itself, or the film and TV series itself, but still, it's a lot less jarring because I'm not looking for those errors constantly as I'm going through. And then, of course, the newer stuff that has been added, like Dark Disciple, like Season 7, that's all canon-only stuff, not retroactive Legends stuff in how they've dealt with it. So there's not a need to be concerned about, well, how will something from this brand new stuff clash with what came in Legends? It's not an issue anymore. Ironically, though, the biggest fear I had came to pass when it came to Siege of Mandalore. Siege of Mandalore was amazing. I absolutely love the way that they handled it. I thought it was terrific. The way they interwove it with Revenge of the Sith was awesome. Although, I will step back and say I would not want to be sitting there trying to figure out how it fits with the film in terms of number of calendar days, like when I was working on the Essential Atlas dated battle maps and stuff with Dan Wallace and mainly Jason Fry, and the whole thing came down to like figuring out which days existed for the films, which were in the holocron. It was information that was given to us. I wouldn't want to necessarily look at Siege of Mandalore with Revenge of the Sith and try to make sure that matches up exactly day to day with the original plan that was in the holocron for Legends. It probably is pretty close because, the film doesn't necessarily change from continuity to continuity. But I don't know. I haven't looked at it, and I don't want to spoil the experience by actually trying to do that. Like, when was it night? What's day 1? What's day 2? What's day 3? They probably got it pretty close. I'm not going to nitpick it to the point where I drive myself nuts. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole again. So, assuming that we can take it at face value that the days aren't all screwed up in some form, or truncated or whatever, I really, really enjoyed it. I thought it was terrific. But at the same time, it opened up a glaring hole in what me and Mark have been saying for ages on Star Wars Beyond the Films, which is that even if they're not saying there's a tiered system, of course there's a tiered system. Even if that tiered system is only like what we saw within G canon previously, or what that label was sort of adapted onto later. Because for a while there, they weren't actually, this is before the GTCSN stuff. For a while there, for the Legends continuity, it was more just sort of there's, the movies and their adaptations, and then there's everything else. But even within the movies and their adaptations that were considered sort of sacrosanct, you had a lot of contradictions, like Yoda being blue in the Empire Strikes Back novelization. So you saw a tiered system, even within that highest tier, of like, okay, the newer movies trump the older ones, which trump the novelizations, which trump the radio dramas and so on because of how close they are to the film and how the radio dramas change the dialogue so much and all that kind of stuff. But now it's supposed to be everything is equal. Well, bullshit. Of course it's not equal because novelizations and things like that are not going to match their source material exactly. So there will be instances where the film trumps a novelization. What has happened now is we have the Ahsoka novel, which in and of itself is not supposed to be a novelization. But it has flashbacks in it to the Siege of Mandalore that absolutely do not match what we see, in specifics at least, in the Siege of Mandalore arc in Clone Wars. And the approach they've taken is to say, well, basically, this is as someone was asking the question on Twitter, that basically, since it's adapting something else, the original source is the more authoritative. You're always going to see deviation with adaptation. But this was adaptation within an original work. Kind of like if we had, if in Vector Prime they had a flashback, or better yet, in the Dark Nest stuff, they have a flashback to certain aspects of like the prequels to see Padme and Anakin so, Luke can learn more about their relationship and that sort of thing. It'd be like changing those flashbacks to no longer match the films and then saying, well, that was an adaptation, ignore the error. I can sort of see that. It's not quite as bad as a novel itself, flat out in its regular contemporary, like present day, whatever that is, material being what contradicts a film and having to be wiped out because of that. But here we are seeing that middle ground of a novelization within a novel or something, an adaptation within a novel, kind of, but not a novelization, being trampled upon because, just like with Lucas and the Clone Wars previously, there was something that already existed before that was allowed to be made. You know that when they were putting together the Ahsoka novel, somebody had to say, yes, you're allowed to do this, here's what to do, for those flashback sequences, because they were Siege of Mandalore, they did tie in, it wasn't just something completely random, but then they come in after having allowed that and say, you know what, we're going to just do this differently. Screw it. It's our call. Except now you don't even have the ability to say, well, this is T canon, that was C canon, so of course T trumps C, because in their words, it's all supposed to fit. It's all supposed to matter. It's all supposed to be one equal and level playing field. But again, we're already seeing the delineation starting between films and novelizations, TV and novelizations, or TV and book adaptations, whatever you want to call it, and now, in the form of TV/film, if you want to go by what Whitwer called it, the Clone Wars being able to trump not an adaptation per se, not a novelization per se, but an adaptation of scenes as flashbacks within what in old Legends parlance would have been considered a C canon publication, a expanded universe novel, as opposed to being film or TV. So yeah, I think that if anything, the recent episodes, I mean, it's been great. Siege of Mandalore was awesome. Ahsoka's walkabout was necessary, but I'm not sure how great it was. But certainly necessary to sort of see what she's been doing, give us that transition, so she's not just going from Jedi to being Jedi. We actually see a period where she's trying not to be. Bad Batch was cool to see, but kind of sucks that it was a story we'd already seen, although they did tweak the story reels as they, and the story of the story reels as they became the final episodes. It's great to finally see all of that come to fruition and really give us an ending for the Clone Wars that feels like a true ending. And to interweave that with Revenge of the Sith, phenomenal, awesome, and to have the ending scene that they use that's a great jumping off point to sort of help connect Clone Wars to Rebels even more, also fantastic. But in doing so late, after already allowing the Ahsoka novel to exist, they have in and of themselves, as an unforced error here, simply because they wanted to tell the story a different way, they had a way they were going to tell the story and gave different information to the author of the Ahsoka novel, perhaps. They have shown us more clearly the cracks in the bullshit armor of, hey, it's all equal. Well, no, it's not. It may be more equal than it used to be, and the intent may be for it all to fit without a gradation happening, but there are going to be contradictions. There are going to have to be instances where those contradictions are addressed, and something is going to trump something else. Unless every single one of those is dealt on a case-by-case basis where we actually see different outcomes, like sometimes an adaptation in a novel trumping a film rather than the other way around, which isn't going to happen, then yes, there are going to be tears even if they're not acknowledged. Just like way early on in the stuff from the Legends continuity, before we had the GTCSN tiers, there were some sources, though not most, but some sources trying to claim it was all equal, even though other sources were claiming, obviously, no, the films trumped the other stuff. So, in that sense, yeah, it's been an interesting thing to see it end. Let's see. I'm trying to make sure I hit everything. How's my opinion changed since? I really enjoy the series now. Not so much back then. Early on, at least, because of the kiddiness, because of the mixed-up chronology, because of the meh animation compared to now, because of constantly running into contradictions with Legends. That said, even going back and watching the earlier episodes now, even though I can step back and watch them for what they are instead of looking for the contradictions, because I'm thinking of them as canon, not Legends right now, even though it's in both continuities, that doesn't make the episodes better. Just means they're not contradicting the current continuity. Doesn't make some of the crap episodes less crappy from those early days. But I think that my enjoyment has been able to be better. And I always really kind of enjoyed once we got past that time jump. And everything got a little bit more mature and it seemed like they had more direction and more arc-based storytelling. I think the most recent stuff has been fantastic. It raises the bar for the series, but it also does mean that, in essence, if the new stuff was awesome, the fact that Siege of Mandalore was awesome doesn't raise the quality of stuff like Bombad Jedi, right? Which is okay, but not amazing Star Wars, or some of that early stuff like, the Blue Shadow Warriors and all that kind of stuff. So if anything, the fact that Siege of Mandalore has been such great quality just means that now the gap between the quality levels of the worst and the best of Clone Wars is even wider than it was before. Thankfully, I think, given when the time jump was, given how much newer stuff we have, I think the bulk of the Clone Wars is really enjoyable and a fun ride. I can handle the cringeworthy stuff now and then. It's just that usually the cringeworthy stuff was early, the better stuff was later, as opposed to, something like watching The Phantom Menace, where there's great stuff sprinkled with the cringeworthy stuff, like some of the Jar Jar antics now and then. It really is a polarization, both time-wise and quality-wise within Clone Wars. Let's see. Other thoughts he asked for specifically. Thoughts on Maul's return? At the time, I remember thinking, what the hell are they doing? Are you serious? And I think it's interesting that they gave an explanation for how he managed to survive, specifically in a story for Legends, but they haven't done that yet for canon. Remember in Legends, we had a story specifically about how he kind of held himself together and how did he get from Naboo to Lotho Minor or wherever it was, and so on and so on and so on. We got to see that happen, but we haven't actually seen that in a story in canon. It's just the whole, well, he survived because he was so pissed. Dark side, energy, anger, etc., etc. I think in the long run, it turned out to be a fantastic decision, even if at the time we were kind of like, really? And then you still kind of continued on and was like, okay, this is getting better now, but now we've got him in Rebels. We find him in Solo briefly, though, take or leave that particular scene. It's cool in the broader context of Maul, but by itself it wouldn't have been all that amazing. And now we have, even with Clone Wars, seeing him continue to develop. And it helps that he's performed by Sam Witwer, who is my favorite Star Wars voice actor, hands down, ever since The Force Unleashed. The way that he performs Maul is outstanding, because it really brings across the menace and yet a subtlety. I find myself sometimes trying to speak like Maul whenever I'm getting frustrated, right? You're like, I don't know what I'm doing now, but, etc., etc. He's always got it's like he's almost out of breath, but he's also so, every time he speaks, he's going to be making a fist off to his side and gritting his teeth. Anyway, so Maul's return, I was skeptical originally. I really enjoyed it by the time we got to the end of the original 5 seasons of Clone Wars. Now that we've seen the 7th season, and we've seen Rebels, and we've seen Solo, I think it was absolutely a great move, although we still need a good, canonical, clear explanation of how he survived and got to where he went, because that story that did explain it is not part of the current continuity. It was Legends. So for Asajj Ventress, I do think the way that they ended her story arc and developed the character once she finally left Dooku's employ in Clone Wars turned out to be much better and enjoyable than the way that they handled it in, say, the Obsession comic in Legends. But she was a more menacing figure back in Legends than she was in Clone Wars. But I thought it was a very good characterization for her, especially once we finally get a real ending for her with Dark Disciple, again, which is canon only, not part of Legends. As far as the Night Sisters, I think the way they were handled was solid for the Night Sisters. Interesting to see the parentage of Maul, right, with Talzin actually being Maul's real mother and that sort of thing, as revealed in Son of Dathomir. And, just seeing all that kind of stuff with the Night Sisters has been great. And it made for some cool stuff in Jedi Fallen Order, too. The fact that we don't get the other side, we don't get any regular non-dark side witches of Dathomir is a little frustrating, because that, of course, is how we originally met the witches of Dathomir in Legends, right? We met the light side ones and the dark side ones in Courtship of Princess Leia. And I will still never forgive Katie Lucas for being arrogant enough when doing the behind-the-scenes featurette about how she created these Night Sisters and developed them for the TV show, and never once mentions Courtship of Princess Leia or Dave Wolverton at all. Yes, you called it Dathomir and called them Night Sisters just because you came up with it. Surely no one ever thought of that before. Certainly not the guy whose work you cribbed and are now snubbing. Still not happy with Katie Lucas's approach to that particular interview. You can find it on the Blu-ray. Let's see. B.J. Hughes Jar Jar, a.k.a. Phil Lamar Jar Jar, though less said about that, the better. It is a horrible performance and a horrible voice to hear with the character when it has you longing for Ahmed Best's Jar Jar. Although Ahmed Best and Jar Jar, they kind of are what Lucas made them. As I've said before, I think actually Jar Jar was much better in the cartoon series than he ever was on screen on the live-action films, because he fits much better the tone, the performance style, and the atmosphere of it. So I think Ahmed Best's Jar Jar actually worked well within Clone Wars. B.J. Hughes, not so much, and it was jarring not to hear Ahmed Best. Let's see. And the character of Ahsoka Tano. Again, Ahsoka irked me to begin with, not even just because of being all childish and all of her little Sky Guy kind of comments and stuff, but just the fact that she existed at all. I'll be honest. Her existence irked me to begin with, because, again, the Legends continuity was the dominant continuity at the time, the Star Wars continuity at the time, and you had this intricate 3-year story arc already put together by books, comics, video games, etc., within that 3-year gap between episodes 2 and 3, where Anakin had no Padawan, was a Padawan himself up until just, half a year, give or take, before Revenge of the Sith. Now here all of a sudden, hey, we're really close to Attack of the Clones, and here's a Padawan you've never heard of. Oh, by the way, and Anakin's a knight now. Enjoy. Have fun. Just, whoa. At the time, that royally irked me, and for a long time, it was part of why I had hoped that eventually, if there was going to be a reboot, that Clone Wars would only be part of that newer continuity, not Legends, in order to allow the previously existing Legend stuff to exist without being destroyed. Except eventually we got Fate of the Jedi with Abeloth, whose backstory ties heavily into the ones from Mortis, so you need the Clone Wars series. And the more that, the Clone Wars got entangled with Legends, the less and less likely that was going to be. Even if a new continuity were to begin, which it did, Clone Wars, at least in what existed at the time, would still exist within the previous continuity as well. So she was one of those first, are you kidding me, type of changes for the Clone Wars itself. Once we get to the point where we have the time jump, she starts to be less abrasive, less kiddish, and acts more mature as a character, gets better character arcs, until eventually she's one of the most beloved characters of Star Wars, particularly as we get to the latter chunk of the Clone Wars with seasons 4 and 5, and then into the stuff that has come with season 7. I don't know that she needed to show up in Rebels to have the same emotional impact that she now has in seasons 5 and 7 of Clone Wars, but it certainly helped as well. Alright, again, that was straight from the exclusive Q&A video for the Nobility of the Butleriverse over on my Patreon. If you're interested in jumping on the Patreon yourself, it is patreon.com/NathanPButler. We do those kind of exclusive Q&A videos each month, answering all the questions asked in the previous month on a collection post, basically, over on Patreon. So that should do it here for this video. Again, that is not the entirety of that exclusive Q&A video from the Nobility of the Butleriverse for May 2020. That's just one question and its answer, but it was a pretty substantial one. So I figured I'd go ahead, include it here with Jonathan's okay, since he was the one asking the question, to be able to answer the questions so many are asking about thoughts on the Clone Wars in retrospect. I hope this was enjoyable, and we'll get back to regular vlog episodes probably eventually. Just not entirely sure when. With that, though, we'll wrap up this one. Thank you for watching. May the Force be with the vlog viewers? I don't know, I haven't really come up with an ending for this one. Thanks.